So we're moving on to a new section this afternoon, the section about communication with nature. I was thinking about, I was like, maybe I should call this section being informed by nature. Because sometimes like communication, I guess we'll want to call it communication because it is two-way, but at the same time it's easy to think of that as like it's only about asking a question and receiving a response. But I guess as part of the framing, I think it's good to realise that even just being connected with submersing yourself in nature, you're allowing nature to like inform you. Like if you think about the meaning of the word to inform, it's about something coming into form. So you're allowing nature's energy to help create, whether it's thoughts, ideas, but even just, what's happening in your body, that's being influenced by just simply being in nature. And so there's also a different spectrum of experience from very specifically asking a question or listening to a message and just sort of enjoying being in the energies of nature. There's also, between those two things, there's like other ways that we receive information from nature, which is not always just about one specific thing, but it helps like shape who we are, shapes how we think, shapes what ideas we get. So wanted to say that first so we don't feel like it's too much pressure to need to get a very specific response to a specific question. There's also other ways that this is happening, but it is good to practice like quite specifically too, because that's part of it and it gives you quite a good focus. So we're going to do that. Cool. Great. So communication with nature. To start with, there's a discussion or a question for you to contemplate in your workbook, which is to think about what are the conditions present when we have the best communication experience with other humans. So think about just what it's like communicating with a human and what conditions, the inner conditions and the outer conditions. So one thing that I wanted to make sure everyone thought about before we go into more detail is that everyone experiences things a little bit differently. So which sense or which experiential field you tend to be more dominant in will change how you perceive information. Because there's definitely, to a certain extent, there's a part of you that's like translating the energetic impulse that you're receiving. And so, sometimes people may even hear, like things as words, but it's not like that being of nature was sending those words. That's part of you has translated that for yourself to be able to understand. So depending on how you're built will make a difference as to how you experience communication. Like if you're quite a tactile, touch-based person, you actually might feel it more in your body as like a different kind of like warming sensation, cooling sensation when it comes to, asking permission. In the plant spirit healing course that I did, like there was a lot of trying to understand what are the gifts, the healing gifts of different flowers by asking the flower to show you and feeling that impulse in your body. Like, does it create a, rising kind of energy that clears your head, or do you feel a warming sensation in your throat, or is it, doing something more around your stomach? So that's inviting a particular like energetic impulse into your body and feeling that as a way of interpreting what healing gifts that flower or that plant might have. But there's also ways, if you're quite visually dominant, you might prefer one of the ways of receiving communication, which is by letting the being of nature dream you. So allowing it, you'd have to sort of get into a bit of a daydreamy kind of state to do it during the day, but you might find it easier to allow your visual sense to take over. So letting the interpretation of the energetic impulse come through your vision. So yeah, it's the invitation for you to sort of find what's your signature way of experiencing communication as well. And it will be different for everybody. Oops. Despite the fact there's different ways, those fundamentals always apply. Like, you need to have an open heart, your state of being, and very much so your energy field needs to be quite clear, because it's like a piece of paper. If the piece of paper is flat and smooth, you can easily write on it. But if I take the same piece of paper and crumple it up into a ball, it's much more difficult to write on. So if you have a lot of static in your field, getting that flow of information through is going to be a lot more challenging. So yeah, no matter what your preferred mode of translation is, there's just things which are going to need to be in place first before you can really hear it. Oh yeah, you also need to feel comfortable using your imagination and playfulness and curiosity. Like if you're trying to encourage visual interpretation of the message, like you do need to let your imagination be there in order to open that doorway to perception. Like even in shamanic practice and journeying, where some people don't even do it very visually, but most people would do that somewhat visually. You're seeing things, and so I might go to a helping spirit and ask a question for a client, because part of the work is like receiving information for people that's helpful to them. But sometimes it's like I'm not getting anything, and so you can use little things like, what would it be like? Or what might they say? Or try to create like a visual scenario that allows spirit to like show you something. So sometimes I might do things like, we're sitting around a fire, and is there like an image that comes out of the fire? Or if something was going to be drawn in the sand next to the fire, what would that be? So you kind of got to like create the invitation at the same time. So yeah, and always that's going to feel like that's your imagination, because it is the doorway to perception. But you have to trust that just because it feels the same as imagination doesn't mean that it is. And hopefully you get enough. One reason that we do these exercises is because you're going to get a question for a partner. So you get to see that sometimes the information that you get back, you couldn't possibly have known how relevant that would be for that person. So you might find a lot of surprising things come up, and that's usually the kind of like proof or confirmation that we need to sort of be able to really trust that although this feels quite different to communicating with people, it's still a great way to do it. Yeah. So I guess to summarize, like the ways we might perceive information, we might receive it, can be like that example for me of hearing words, but like I said, that's probably a translation of an energetic impulse. A feeling in the body, so like the yes or no that we practice, choosing a solo site. Dreams, either waking or sleeping. Signs, symbols, and synchronicities. So this is where like people talk about omens or signs. Some of you experienced it when you asked permission, like what happened with the wind or the leaves at the time. With that one, like it's good to remember if it's not immediately obvious what it meant, then just leave it, like, because that gives, if you try to keep thinking about it and working it out, that usually just means it's your mind jumping in and it's probably going to be wrong. So it's either the meaning is really immediately obvious, or just sit on it and it'll become apparent in time. Because especially when you're working with the non-ordinary realm or spirit, things don't always happen in a linear kind of way. Time only appears linear in this dimension, not the other ones. So sometimes something that, you might experience something now that relates to a significant experience you had 2 years ago, and it might very well be linked. Who knows? Yeah. And the last one is inner vision. So you can also ask to, this is where you got to be really connected to your gut, but you can kind of then also use your intuition and your inner guidance in combination with working with nature. A bit like finding out where you need to go. Like, am I being drawn to that tree? Might be a combination of looking at what's happening or a combination of where you feel pulled. So that's receiving information, but very simply to just cover how do you send it. Obviously that's a little different. Speaking words out loud actually can really work because you've got intention behind those words. But you have to first make sure that you're really connected to the intention of what you're asking. That's really the main thing. So what I recommend is when we do the exercise where you ask a question for yourself, make sure it's a question that you actually really want the answer to, so much that you feel that need for a response to that question in your heart, because that's going to lead to a more reliable and powerful answer from nature. So find the question that's sitting in your heart, and some people like to sort of visualize like it moving out of your heart, and you place it like into your solar site, like, here is my question, and you try to get that feeling of it coming from your heart. Some people don't really like to speak out loud, and it's more like a meditative sort of like very focused on what is this question and kind of mentally send it out to nature around you. Some people like to be very visual with it, so if you can create like an image in your mind. Some people will do things like put the image that represents the question into like a bubble and like let it drift off into nature. So again, lots of ways that you can play with it. So we're going to do a partner exercise now. So you need to think of a question that you want an answer to. This one, it's okay if you keep it a little bit lighter. You don't need to be sharing your most deep and meaningful questions, because you are going to share it with a person. So make sure it's a question that you don't mind telling someone about. So think of a question for yourself that you want an answer to, and then we'll partner up, and what will happen is that you will go and ask your partner's question. But first, think of your question. Okay, and then partner up, preferably someone you don't know extremely well, because otherwise you're going to already have ideas as to what the answer to that question is. So try to find someone that you maybe don't know quite so well. So you can stand up and walk across the room if you want to pick someone out.